Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. It is Dr. Petrie with you talking about the Industrial Revolution. This short intro just kind of whets your appetite for the larger PowerPoint that is in Schoology waiting for you. I will also place in a study guide for you to look for as you're reading through and taking notes. But I wanted you to know a little bit about the Industrial Revolution before you begin. So the Industrial Revolution refers to the rapid changes in the organization of the manufacturing industry, the people who build stuff. And this changed countries moving from a period of rural agriculture to urban industrial economies. So what happened is people moved from the country where they were farmers to the cities where they were workers. This period began in the late 18th century in England, and then it spread throughout the world into Europe and then into the United States. So as you can see on this slide, before the Industrial Revolution begins, we have a huge population explosion in Europe. And before the Industrial Revolution, famine, which is starvation, war, and disease were really common in Europe. Many of the innovations that we're going to talk about in the Industrial Revolution helped contribute to the decline of these problems. By the end of the 17th century, Europeans had developed many ways to prevent the spread of the bubonic plague, one of which was quarantining the sick. In 1721, the last plague outbreak occurred in Marseille, France, and the disease did not reoccur in England or in Europe for the rest of the century. As you know, or probably remember from 7th grade world history, the bubonic plague comes from fleas, and the elimination of this rat, the black rat, carries the Pasteurella pestis, the plague, and when these creatures were eliminated, so was disease. So a couple of other reasons for population growth is that we eliminated some other diseases like smallpox, also public sanitation, promoted better health, and an increase in food supply meant fewer famines, fewer people starving to death, especially as transportation improves. I'm going to move on. I'll let you talk about I want to talk about the Enclosure Movement. So the Enclosure Acts curtailed, meaning stopped, all access to public lands. And this allowed the nobles in England to organize and better keep track of the crops and animals that were on public space. These landowners enclosed their territory, put up fences to deny access to peasant farmers. And several methods of the enclosures proved popular, including growing hedges or putting up stone walls or wooden fences. The former method, the hedges, is very popular in Britain's lowlands region. This movement began in England, and it had the biggest effect in the Midlands. It spreads to many other European countries, including Russia, Hungary, Germany, France, and Denmark. And although this dates back to the medieval era or period, the enclosure movement was particularly common throughout the late 17th, 18th, and early 19th centuries. Now, there are pros and cons to this. The positives were that many farmers benefited from the enclosure movement, and this led to more productive methods of farming and an increase in food production. Small, unproductive farms go out of business, and they give their land to larger, economically viable or more robust farms. Poor farmers who'd been making zero profits were able to work on larger farms to support their families. Now, of course, there were also cons or negatives. And the enclosure movement was a practical strategy for organizing land among wealthy landowners. It adversely impacted peasant farmers. These people struggled with poverty and a lack of adequate work. Many poor farmers were forced to give up their land to wealthy landowners and move to the cities in search of work. Peasant families that held land were generally unable to produce the legal documents proving their ownership. which meant the rich people could repossess the land and claim it again. Also, these people were accustomed to using public lands to obtain firewood, fruit, nuts, and pig food. This was called gleaning rights, and now, after the Enclosure Movement, it no longer exists. So people thought they were entitled to these free things, and then these laws come along, and no, they're not. So, I want to talk about the impacts of the Enlightenment for you to consider as you read through this quite lengthy document. The first impact is what's known as the Romanticism. Romanticism was a literary and artistic movement in the late 18th and 19th centuries, early 19th centuries. Romantics valued individualism and creativity, and they rejected the mechanicization of daily life. They didn't like the Industrial Revolution because they didn't like machines. They didn't like machines dominating daily life. So the Romantics encouraged people to commune with nature and allow themselves to experience greater emotional interactions and feelings. And so several of the well-known Romantic figures are William Wordsworth, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, William Blake, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, James Wyatt, Robert Schumann, Robert Wagner, and John Constable. And in fact, you're looking at a landscape from John Constable, which is called Hay Wain. So the Romantics glorified the divine power of nature as a reaction to the Industrial Revolution's achievement of controlling nature through technology. All right, the visual arts. So this is a picture called Third Class Carriage, and it's an example of an Industrial Revolution era artist addressing the social themes of the period. Before this time, the arts, especially painting, had been solely for the upper classes, and the upper classes were generally uninterested in depictions of the poor. They would most often hire an artist to paint their family, or paint their wife, or paint the husband, and glorify them in all their finery. And this Honor d'Almayer is showing us what the poor and working classes look like. So, and you can see this photo has a great deal of compassion or empathy for these people that are crowded together on the train. Okay, next we look at the visual arts, and this is the Fighting Temeraire, I don't know how to say it, but I hope you like my attempt at a French accent. So this Romantic art often illustrated old scenes like sunset, castles, farms, alongside of steam trains, boats, or some other industrial element. The painting in this slide shows the passing of a bygone era. The Temeraire is one of the ships that survived the Battle of Trafalgar, and it's being towed away to be destroyed by a modern steam tugboat. Thank you, Mr. Turner, for commemorating the end of the wooden ships and the beginning of the metal steamships. So Charles Dickens, you've probably had to read him before. Charles Dickens' literature really focused on poverty, and particularly the poverty in the Industrial Revolution. His works were Hard Times, Oliver Twist, Great Expectation, and of course, everybody loves Tiny Tim and The Christmas Carol. Dickens' writing contained many descriptions of urban life during the Industrial Revolution, and they illustrate the struggles of the poor, whom he always supported and championed throughout his career in England. All right, next up is Émile Zola. Zola was a French journalist who wrote about many of France's most important social issues. His novel Germinal describes the oppression and difficulties that confront miners in a French village during the Industrial Revolution. This book culminates or finishes with a huge strike against the mining company, and kind of ushers in the whole idea of unions and labor relations. And so as we see the Industrial Revolution proliferate, you're going to learn about the progressive movement, and you're going to learn about the drive to unionize. So Next is a look at industrialization today. You see pollution, you see blue skies and skyscrapers. What's going on in here? Well, now, a couple hundred years after, we know that the Industrial Revolution changed Western society quite a bit. Thousands of people moved from rural to urban centers where manufacturing is located. This has led to crowding and the creation of slums in our cities. There are new social class divisions that come about, including a wealthy bourgeois middle class, the owners of factories and the other industrial enterprises, as well as a new lower working class, which often has poor working conditions and lives in poverty, also known as squalor. Industrialization brought significantly higher levels of environmental pollution to wherever it was. The burning of coal for energy and home heating often blackened city skies and the air. And the increased food production and manufacturing goods meant greater availability and lower prices. This meant economic improvement for many people in the industrialized countries and a higher standard of living. By 1900, many people in the Western world consumed more and lived longer than their predecessors. So, was the Industrial Revolution good? Yes. Was the Industrial Revolution bad? Yes. Healthier people, except for if you were poor and you lived near the pollution source. Better standard of living, but now we have childhood obesity, where poor people are eating at McDonald's and fast food, not healthy foods, instead of organic, farm-grown, locally grown produce. So the Industrial Revolution is still with us, still a big issue as we talk about economic equality for the rest of the semester. Thank you for your attention. Again, look in Schoology and you will find a study guide for this lengthy PowerPoint and reading on the Industrial Revolution. Until then, I will see you in class.